A woman named Sarah flew into Heathrow last October with £3,000 set aside for shopping. She had been saving for 2 years. She wanted Burberry. She wanted the department stores. She wanted the experience she had seen in every London travel piece she had ever read. And she got it. She spent every pound. She stood at the counter at Harrods while her purchases were folded into tissue paper and placed in the famous green bags. And then she asked the question she had been planning to ask for 2 years: where do I go to claim the VAT back? The sales assistant paused. Then she said quietly, as if delivering news she was tired of delivering, "We do not do that anymore." And when Sarah pushed, when she asked why, when she said she had specifically budgeted for that refund, the assistant said something that has been echoing in my head ever since. Next time, try Paris. Paris does it. Italy does it. Spain, Germany, Portugal, every country in Europe does it. Every single one except the United Kingdom. And that decision, made on New Year's Eve 2020, announced quietly, defended with confident predictions that turned out to be spectacularly wrong, is costing London's famous shopping districts £640 million a year. Not in theory, not projected. £640 million in sales that walked out of London and got on a flight to Milan. You're not imagining it. The London you arrive at is not the London that was being sold to you. And in this investigation, we are going to expose 3 deliberate decisions that are quietly draining the city of the visitors, the spending, and the reputation it built over decades. The tax robbery that sent the world's highest spenders to its competitors. The entry toll that is charging families just to be allowed to apply to visit. And the pickpocket economy operating in the shadow of the most famous tourist landmarks in the world. The first crime was committed on New Year's Eve 2020, and the man who committed it told Parliament it would have no significant economic impacts. For most of the post-war era, if you flew to London from New York, Dubai, or Tokyo and spent money in its shops, you were entitled to reclaim the value-added tax on your purchases when you left. The scheme, called the VAT Retail Export Scheme, had been operating in some form since the United Kingdom joined the European Economic Community in 1973. It was not a luxury. It was infrastructure. It was the mechanism that made London competitive with Paris and Milan for the world's highest spending visitors. Gulf state tourists visiting on their European shopping trips would spend an average of €24,000 in the United Kingdom per visitor. They did this because the tax refund at departure made the economics work in London's favor. On the night of December 31, 2020, the Conservative government abolished the scheme. The stated reason was Brexit-related administrative complexity. The official prediction from the government's own budget office was that the decision would have no significant economic impacts. That prediction was wrong, and the consequences are now documented, quantified, and impossible to dispute. The New West End Company, the organization representing the businesses on Oxford Street, Regent Street, Bond Street, and Mayfair, published figures for 2024. The West End lost an estimated £640 million in unrealized international visitor revenue, revenue that was available, revenue from tourists who were physically standing in London, who had already paid for their flights and their hotel rooms and their meals, who were willing to spend. They spent, and then they went somewhere else the following year and spent more. The £640 million figure was itself an increase. In 2023, the loss was £400 million. The gap is not closing. It is widening every year. The mechanism of the damage is straightforward. Every other major European country maintained the equivalent of the old United Kingdom scheme after 2021. France, Italy, Spain, Germany, Portugal, the Netherlands, all of them still offer international tourists a refund of up to 20% on purchases made in their shops. The United Kingdom does not, which means that when a tourist from Saudi Arabia stands in a Knightsbridge boutique and a Parisian boutique and considers where to spend £50,000 on watches and jewelry, the price differential is not aesthetic or cultural, it is mathematical. Paris is 20% cheaper on the same item. The tourist is not being irrational. The tourist is doing arithmetic. Global Blue, the company that processes tax refunds across Europe, published data showing that in-store sales across the continent surged 16% in November 2024 and 20% in December, driven by high-spending international visitors exercising their refund entitlement. During the same period, the United Kingdom was, in the new West End company's own characterization, significantly behind. The proof is not just in the West End numbers. CBER, the Center for Economics and Business Research, published analysis in July 2025 showing that in real, inflation-adjusted terms, tourist spending in the United Kingdom is still £2.7 billion below where it was in 2019. The headline visitor numbers look fine. The headline spending in pounds looks fine, because inflation has pushed the nominal figure up. But strip away price rises, and accommodation in London costs 35% more than it did in 2019. Restaurants nearly 30% more, airfares nearly 50% more, and the purchasing power of what tourists are actually spending is running £2.7 billion short of the 2019 benchmark. Oxford Economics estimates that reinstating the tax-free scheme would boost Britain's GDP by more than £10 billion and support 70,000 new jobs. The Association of International Retail puts the potential uplift at £3.7 billion in additional annual tourist spending. The government has stated it has no plans to act on either estimate. And here is the gut punch that lives inside that number. When Gulf state visitors, the cohort that once chose London almost exclusively for its European shopping, were tracked after the scheme's abolition, their retail spending in the rest of Europe recovered to 153% of 2019 levels. In the United Kingdom, it sat at 60%. Same visitors, same spending power, different destination. London convinced them in 4 years to take their €24,000 per visit and give it to Paris. Meanwhile, Visit Britain, the national body responsible for promoting the United Kingdom to international travelers, had its budget cut by over 40% for 2025 and 2026. The government removed the mechanism that made shopping in London financially rational. Then it reduced the budget for telling the world that London was worth visiting. These are not the actions of a city competing for tourism. These are the actions of a city that decided, somewhere in the small print of a New Year's Eve announcement, that the high-spending tourist was someone else's problem. But even if you accept that loss, even if you tell yourself the shopping was never why you were going to London, there is still a second crime to reckon with. And this one happens before you even get on the plane. For most of living memory, if you held an American passport, an Australian passport, or a passport from most Western European countries, flying to London required nothing beyond the ticket and the document itself. You arrived, you showed your passport, you entered. That was the entire process. That changed on January 8th, 2025, when the United Kingdom's Electronic Travel Authorization, known as ETA, came into force for American, Australian, Canadian, and most other non-European visitors. 3 months later, on April 2nd, 2025, the requirement was extended to European nationals as well. On February 25th, 2026, full enforcement began. No permission, no travel. If you do not have an approved ETA linked to your passport before you attempt to board a flight to the United Kingdom, the airline will not let you on the plane. The airline may be fined for the error. The fee, when the scheme launched, was £10. By April 2025, it had risen to £16. By April 2026, it will cost £20. That is a 100% increase in under 18 months. Each individual traveler requires a separate application. Your child, your infant, your baby in a carry cot, separately. £20. There is no appeal process if the application is refused. Processing can take up to 3 working days, though most decisions are issued within minutes. The government's stated justification is that the cost of modernizing the United Kingdom's digital border infrastructure should be borne by travelers, rather than by British taxpayers. Here's the calculation. A family of 4 traveling from Frankfurt to London for a long weekend must now perform before they can book their trip. £20 per person, £80 total, for the right to apply to enter a country they previously walked into without a second thought. And this is the only such charge in Europe. Germany does not charge EU citizens to visit. France does not. Italy does not. The European Union's own equivalent system had not launched as of early 2026. The United Kingdom is charging its closest neighbors for a privilege that every other European country still offers for free. The scale of the scheme tells you how broad its reach has become. 24.8 million electronic travel authorizations were issued between the launch in October 2023 and the end of 2025. That number covers the period before full enforcement, when many visitors did not know the requirement existed and were not being checked at the gate. From February 2026, the checks are mandatory, and consider the family that the machinery does not accommodate. Children who hold dual British citizenship, born in the United Kingdom to parents who later moved abroad, may be required to present a British passport to prove their exemption. If they travel with only a foreign passport and cannot demonstrate their British citizenship at the gate, the airline may refuse them boarding. The Home Office has issued temporary guidance allowing airlines discretion to accept alternative documentation for a British child trying to come home. CBER cited heightened barriers to entry as one of the documented factors in the continuing shortfall in United Kingdom visitor volumes. Every major competitor destination, Paris, Rome, Madrid, and Amsterdam, remains frictionless for European visitors. No pre-registration, no fee, no 3-day processing window for a family that decides to visit. London added friction at the front door while its competitors held theirs open. The high spenders already left for Paris because of the shopping tax. The spontaneous visitors are now stopping to do paperwork before they can book. But the entry toll is not the last of the hidden costs. Even after you pay it, even after you land and clear the gate, what greets you on the streets of the most famous tourist destination in the world has its own dark account to settle. London's Metropolitan Police Force built one of the most recognizable law enforcement brands in the world, the unarmed officer, the Bobby, the institution that gave the world the word policing. At its funding peak, the Met had the resources to station officers visibly and frequently across the highest footfall locations in the city. In 2010, that began to change. Between 2010 and 2018, austerity policy removed approximately 3,000 officers from the Metropolitan Police. Annual funding fell from £3.62 billion to roughly £3.3 billion for much of that period. And while officers were taken off the streets, the city's visitor numbers were climbing toward their 2019 peak. More tourists, fewer officers. The arithmetic of that combination expressed itself in the statistics that followed. In the 12 months from April 2024 to March 2025, the Metropolitan Police recorded 102,000 cases of theft from the person in London. That is pickpocketing. That is bag snatching. That is phone theft committed against people in the act of using their phones. The figure represents a 23.5% increase year on year. In calendar year 2024 alone, 80,000 mobile phones were reported stolen in London. In 2023, the figure was 64,000, and in a single year, phone theft increased by 25%. The Evening Standard published data in October 2024 showing theft from person offenses were up 38% over the previous 12 months. These numbers are not anomalies. They are a consistent trend moving in one direction, and they are concentrated exactly where tourists go. The borough of Westminster, which contains Big Ben, the Houses of Parliament, Buckingham Palace, Trafalgar Square, and the entry points to half of London's most iconic landmarks, recorded 41,539 criminal offenses in a recent reporting year, the highest volume of any London borough. Not in an outer zone, not in a neighborhood without significant policing. In the place where every first-time visitor to London goes first. On the Underground, the picture is sharper still. Transport for London data, covering an April to September reporting period, showed that theft on the Tube increased 83%. Robberies were up 107%. Oxford Circus, the station under the most photographed shopping street in the United Kingdom, is one of the documented hotspots. The Metropolitan Police's own official guidance now advises visitors to wear their backpacks on the front of their body while traveling on the London Underground. Read that sentence again. The official government advice is to assume that if you carry your bag normally on the Tube, it may be stolen. Here is the gut punch that lives inside that statistic. The phone is not an object. For a tourist alone in a foreign city, the phone is the map, the translation service, the hotel address, the emergency contact, the boarding pass, the bank app, the camera holding every photograph from the trip. When it is taken, and 80,000 were taken in 2024, the journey does not pause. The journey ends. You stand outside a Westminster police station, attempting to file a report, in a city that generated a leaflet telling you that you should have carried your bag differently. The trip you spent months planning and thousands of pounds funding is over at the hands of a crime the city quantified, documented, and apparently decided it could not meaningfully reduce. So here's the full picture. London charged you more to book your hotel and your restaurant meal. Accommodation prices up 35% since 2019. It required you to pay a fee and complete a government application before you were allowed to board a flight. It removed the tax refund that used to make its shops 20% more competitive than Paris. And then it sent you to Westminster to see the sights, where the police recorded more crime than anywhere else in the city, and where the official advice is to assume someone is already watching your pocket. So what do you do with all of this? You go. London is still London. The British Museum is still the most visited museum in the United Kingdom, and it is still free. The theater is still the best in the world. The pubs, the history layered into every side street, the sense of a city that has been accumulating its stories for 2,000 years, none of that has been abolished by a government policy announcement. But you go differently. You go in April or September, the shoulder season, when accommodation runs 20 to 30% cheaper than August, and the crowds have thinned from every queue. You apply for your electronic travel authorization directly at gov.uk, not through the third-party websites imitating the government service and charging additional fees. You carry your valuables in a bag that closes in front of you on the Tube, on every line that passes through the central zones. You do not put your phone on the table at a tourist area restaurant. And if you are a high-spending visitor who plan to buy jewelry, watches, or luxury fashion, know this. Paris is 20% cheaper on the same items than London, because France maintained the shopping scheme that the UK chose to eliminate. That is not a rumor. That is documented government policy that has been in effect since January 1st, 2021. You can make your own decision about where to spend your money. The numbers the tourism board shows you are not lies. They are just incomplete. Visitor counts are up. Nominal spending is up. But strip away 5 years of inflation, and the real purchasing power of what tourists are spending in London is still £2.7 billion, short of where it was in 2019. A city losing high-spending visitors to Paris. A city making entry harder while its competitors made it easier. A city that cut its own promotional budget by 40% while the problem was getting worse. These are not accidents. These are choices. They were made deliberately by people who were warned about the consequences and who chose to proceed anyway. If you've been to London in the last 2 years and your experience did not match what the tourist board was promising, I want to hear exactly what happened. If you were pickpocketed at Oxford Circus, if you stood at a counter and discovered the value-added tax refund no longer exists, or if the electronic travel authorization process became a problem for your family, tell me in the comments. And if knowing what cities are actually doing to the people who visit them matters to you, subscribe, because this is a conversation that has barely started.